She thought it was just a slab of concrete in the middle of a forgotten field, something left over from a failed construction site or old utility project. But the metal ring embedded in the center told a different story. Beneath the weeds, the rust, and the silence was a vault door sealed shut for decades. And when she cracked it open, what she found inside didn't just change her fortune, it rewrote everything she thought she knew about the world. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from. We love hearing from people around the world. And if stories like this make your heart race, hit that subscribe button. Because tomorrow's story, it goes even deeper than this one. She hadn't meant to buy land. Not really. The auction listing said, metal salvage opportunity. And that's what caught her eye. Old fence posts, scattered pipes, maybe a gutted trailer or two. She figured she could flip it all for scrap and make rent for the month. But when Jess Carter drove out to the edge of County Line past Route 9, all she saw was a flat field of overgrown grass and silence. No buildings, no towers, no signs of value. Until she noticed the patch in the middle where the grass grew thinner, like something just beneath the surface had been keeping the soil cold. She walked to the center, boots crunching on cracked concrete, and saw the outline of a circle, maybe 12 feet across, rimmed with bolts, and so weathered it almost blended into the slab. She dropped to her knees and brushed aside dirt and pebbles. That's when she saw it. The faint embossing on the edge. Property of the United States Strategic Civil Defense Command. She froze. She hadn't heard of that since history class, some Cold War-era department that supposedly dissolved decades ago. But this wasn't a plaque or a leftover piece of signage. This was a vault door, and it was real. She stood up slowly, eyes wide, heart racing. A bunker? On her land? Her first instinct was disbelief. Her second was adrenaline. She ran back to her truck and grabbed her crowbar, then returned to the concrete slab and tapped around the edge, listening. Hollow. Definitely hollow. She smiled. Jess wasn't just any girl. She was a mechanic's daughter, raised on carburetors, compression ratios, and a deep distrust of anything that didn't come apart with a socket wrench. She'd spent most of her 20s running a tiny repair shop inherited after her dad passed fixing beat-up trucks for locals who paid in deer meat and IOUs. She wasn't rich. She wasn't famous. But she knew how to open stubborn things. And this was the most stubborn-looking door she'd ever seen. It took her 2 days to gather what she needed. A rented generator, an old angle grinder, industrial lubricant. Her friend Danny loaned her a used winch, no questions asked. Just don't call me if you find any body bags, he joked. She didn't laugh. Not because it wasn't funny, but because deep down, something told her this wasn't going to be a joke. It felt too serious, too heavy. The kind of heavy you don't walk away from. On the third morning, just after sunrise, she stood in front of the door again, gloves on, tools ready, and whispered under her breath, "Let's see what you've been hiding." And then she started cutting. Jess hadn't told anyone where she was. Not her landlord, not her cousin Nate, not even her best friend Chelsea, who usually knew everything before Jess said it out loud. Something about the vault made her quiet. Not afraid, exactly, but protective. Like whatever was sealed down there wasn't just old and forgotten, it was waiting. And she didn't want the world to know she'd found it until she knew what it was. If it was nothing, no harm done. But if it was something, she wasn't going to let anyone steal it from her before she understood what she had. The tools screamed against the metal. Sparks shot into the air as the angle grinder chewed through bolts older than her father's birth certificate. The metal flinched with each pass, but didn't give. She sprayed lubricant, waited, wiped, and kept going. Her gloves burned through at the fingertips. Her arms ached from the angle of the cuts. Every few minutes, she paused to catch her breath and scan the woods, just in case. The generator coughed behind her, keeping time with her heartbeat. Jess had brought a flashlight, 2 backup batteries, and a crowbar. That was it. No cell service, no backup plan. Just her, the door, and the stupid hope that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't wasting her time. She worked through the morning, through lunch, through the kind of quiet that makes your own breathing sound too loud. When the final bolt gave way with a groan that echoed through the field, Jess leaned back on her heels, panting. The door was still shut, but now it could move. She looped the winch's hook through a rusted ring and fired the motor. Slowly, painfully, the vault creaked open, inch by inch, groaning like something alive. And then it stopped, stuck, just wide enough for a person to slip through sideways. The air that came out smelled like steel and silence. Jess held her breath. The flashlight clicked on with a pale beam, weak and flickering. She pointed it inside. A tunnel, lined in metal, sloping gently downward. The walls were ribbed, like a military-grade pipeline. There were no sounds, no water dripping, no humming lights. Just stillness, and the warm orange glow of dust dancing in the beam. She stood at the threshold for a long minute, her boots half in shadow, half in light. Then, she reached into her jacket, pulled out her father's dog tags, something she always wore when she worked alone, and kissed them once for luck. The only thing more dangerous than going in without a plan was walking away now and wondering for the rest of her life what had been waiting inside. She stepped through the door. The ground shifted beneath her boots. Not like an earthquake, more like a pressure drop. Like the tunnel had been holding its breath, and now, so was she. She didn't know what she'd find, but she knew she wouldn't leave empty-handed. The metal swallowed sound. Every step Jess took echoed, and then disappeared, like the tunnel was absorbing her presence, learning her rhythm. Her flashlight flickered, then steadied. The air wasn't stale like she'd expected. It was dry, filtered, almost preserved. She brushed her hand along the wall. It wasn't just steel. It was reinforced, industrial. The kind of material designed to last centuries, not decades. This wasn't a panic room or a storm shelter. This was something else. She followed the slope down for about 30 feet until the tunnel opened into a cylindrical chamber. The walls were lined with control panels and analog gauges. Thick wires snaked across the ceiling like veins. At the center stood a power hub, completely dark, no signs of life. But behind the hub, another door. This one was smaller, rectangular, and embedded with a biometric lock old-school fingerprint scanner fused to a keypad and card reader. The kind of tech that had been top of the line during the Cold War. Jess chuckled under her breath. Yeah, let me just grab my clearance badge from 1963. She knelt beside the panel and popped the cover open. Inside, a tangle of wires, fuses, and dust, but nothing she hadn't seen before. Give her a few minutes and a flathead, and she could hotwire a lawnmower to run on moonshine. This wasn't that different. She clipped a jumper wire to the battery from her flashlight and bridged the circuit. A faint hum pulsed through the wall. The scanner lit up green for a second, then cut out. "Come on, don't die on me," she whispered, adjusting the connection. Another spark, another pulse. Then the keypad beeped. Jess grinned. Her fingers danced across the numbers she tried, the obvious ones first. 0000, 1,234. Nothing. Then, she paused. What if it wasn't a code? She looked down. Scratched into the paint, barely visible, were 4 digits, not etched, mechanically carved by hand. 1978. She keyed it in. Beep. Click. The door slid open. Behind it, a corridor stretched into the earth. Not a tunnel, a hallway. Fluorescent lights blinked to life overhead in sequence, one by one, as if waking up from a long sleep. The hum of electricity returned, faint but steady. Jess stepped forward, heart pounding louder than her boots, and then she saw it. A window on the right side of the hallway, thick glass, fogged with dust. She wiped it clean with her sleeve and gasped. Behind the glass, parked in precise rows under recessed lighting, were armored vehicles. Dozens of them. Humvees, MRAPs. Experimental rigs she didn't even recognize. All spotless. All untouched. All sealed in a hidden underground garage that hadn't seen daylight in half a century. She whispered out loud. No. Freaking way. But she wasn't dreaming. She'd found a military stockpile, and if she was right, it was worth more than everything she'd ever touched in her life combined. Jess moved down the hallway in slow, reverent steps, like someone walking through a museum of secrets. Every few feet, another window revealed a different bay, each packed with heavy machinery that had no business sitting underground this pristine. There were armored transport vehicles with matte black finishes, tactical mobile units with reinforced plating. Even a few strange all-terrain rigs she couldn't identify, squat, angular, with wide, claw-like tires and no visible doors. Her breath fogged the glass as she stared. None of them had dust, not a speck. It was as if time had skipped this place entirely, like the whole facility had been vacuum-sealed and buried not just to survive a disaster, but to outlive the people who built it. She finally found a hatch labeled Bay Access, Level 1. It had no lock, just a heavy wheel. She cranked open with effort. The pressure released with a hiss. Jess stepped through. The ceiling stretched at least 30 feet overhead. The walls curved like a dome, lined in what looked like titanium composite. She saw the vehicles now from the floor level, a dozen armored beasts, each parked on magnetic pads with service terminals nearby. Some had markings, faded numbers, unit tags, and strange call signs like Ghost Hound and Echo 7. She walked toward the nearest one, a gunmetal gray transport rig with riot-resistant windows and plated treads like a tank. There was a paper label taped to the windshield, yellowed with age but still legible. Activated. Do not remove. Her fingers hovered over the door handle. Cold metal. No dust, no rust, no decay. She pulled it, clicked open without resistance. The interior smelled of leather, oil, and ozone. The dashboard lights flickered once as she stepped in. Not dead, just asleep. Jesus, she muttered. A hiss behind her made her spin. One of the other vehicles, something boxy and matte white, had lit up. A soft hum came from beneath its chassis. Jess stood frozen, the door to the gray rig still open, her heart pounding. No one had touched it. Nothing should be running, but it was. She backed away slowly, scanning the garage. Still empty, still quiet. But her instincts were screaming. "All right," she whispered. "You wanted adventure." The far side of the bay held another door, this one marked Operations Level 3 Access Only. A keycard scanner beside it blinked red. Jess walked up to it anyway, looked at the pad, then at her reflection in the stainless steel surface of the door, dirt-smeared face, oil-streaked gloves, eyes wide with disbelief. She reached into her back pocket, where she kept an old leather notebook her father's filled with sketches, receipts, repair diagrams, and one plastic sleeve that held the only ID he ever kept from his army days. A laminated access badge. Expired, cracked, but maybe just enough. She scanned it. The red light blinked once, then it turned green, and the door unlocked. The door swung open with a pneumatic hiss, revealing a narrow staircase that spiraled downward. Jess hesitated at the threshold, flashlight trembling slightly in her hand. She wasn't sure if it was adrenaline, fear, or some deep part of her subconscious begging her to turn back. But she wasn't wired for that. Not now. Not after what she'd seen. She descended, each step ringing out like a countdown. The stairs led to a corridor narrower than the ones above. The air was colder, heavier. Emergency lights along the ceiling flickered as she passed, casting brief, warped shadows. The walls were lined with framed documents behind shatterproof glass schematics, tactical planning maps, even yellowing memos labeled Top Secret in bold red stamps. Some were dated 1983, others earlier. But every single one was signed by the same agency, United States Strategic Civil Defense Command. Jess didn't stop to read them all, but one caught her eye. A map of the U.S. with red rings radiating out from major cities, not nuclear targets, but evacuation zones. A sticky note had been scrawled across the top. Convoy Sea Route, Operation Black Vest. She shivered. At the end of the corridor she found it. A heavy vault-style door labeled Command Center. This one didn't need a scanner, just brute strength. She braced herself and pushed. The hinges groaned, and then gave way. Inside was a room frozen in time. Desks arranged in a U-shape. Switchboards, old cathode monitors, filing cabinets, a central table with a large backlit map embedded in the surface, phones with spiral cords. Everything was intact. But what caught Jess's eye wasn't the technology. It was the chair at the far end of the room, still pulled out. A half-empty mug sat beside it. Dust clung to the rim. And behind the chair, a door slightly ajar, a small interior chamber with frosted glass, and a single word stenciled on it. Stasis. Jess walked toward it, pulse thundering in her ears. She pushed the door open with her knuckles, half expecting nothing, just a closet maybe, or a maintenance alcove. But what she saw made her breath catch. A pod, 8 feet long, rounded, frosted with condensation, tubes and wires coiled behind it like serpents. A control panel blinked softly. Standby mode. She stepped closer, wiped the glass. There was a man inside. His eyes were closed, his face pale but calm. Military uniform, patches worn to blur. Jess stumbled back, heart pounding in her throat. This wasn't equipment storage. This was human preservation. And if the status panel was right, he wasn't dead, just waiting. She stood there in the stillness, unsure whether to scream or kneel. Somewhere, above her, an engine hummed again. Another vehicle had activated. Maybe it was proximity. Maybe it was protocol. Or maybe someone, somewhere, knew the bunker had been breached. Jess swallowed hard and turned to the panel beside the pod. Awaken sequence. Confirm Y. Divided by N. Her hand hovered over the screen. If she pressed it, everything would change. So she did. The machine came alive with a deep, mechanical exhale, a sound Jess had never heard before, something between a sigh and a warning. Lights along the pod's base glowed blue, then green. The condensation on the glass shimmered and began to melt. Valves hissed. Tubes detached themselves with soft pops. The panel read, "Processing vitals. Awakening in 90 seconds." Jess took 2 steps back and stared, her brain failing to catch up with what her eyes were seeing. This wasn't just a Cold War bunker. It was a deep storage protocol, one that involved people, human assets. Military personnel placed into stasis and locked beneath ground, forgotten by time. The man didn't look older than 40, though he had the kind of face that could be younger or older depending on the lighting. A thin scar ran down his jawline. His hair was buzzed military short, and his hands, resting palm up at his sides, twitched once as the chamber hissed again. Jess wanted to run. Her body screamed for it. But her feet wouldn't move. She was too deep now in the bunker, in the mystery, in whatever story this man carried on his skin and inside his chest. The pod clicked open. Warm air rushed out in a vapor cloud, and the man's chest rose sharply. His eyes fluttered. He coughed once, violently, then again softer, his lungs remembering how to breathe. Slowly, his eyes opened pale blue, confused, focused. They met hers. Jess raised both hands. Hey, easy. You're okay. You're in a facility, underground. I found I didn't know." She stopped. What was she supposed to say? The man sat up. His movements were slow but deliberate, like every muscle was remembering its job. He looked around the stasis room, the frost, the pod, the blinking terminal, then finally, back to her. "Who activated the sequence?" he asked, voice hoarse. "I did," Jess said. "I found the bunker. You were sealed in. I think I woke you up." He blinked. "Are you command?" Jess almost laughed. "No, I'm a mechanic, from Glenn County. I bought this land a week ago for scrap." He swung his legs over the edge of the pod and planted his feet on the floor. He looked down, stared at them like they were foreign, then pushed himself upright. He didn't fall. He didn't wobble. He stood like a man, trained to never collapse. "My name is Sergeant Daniel Rourke," he said slowly. "Serial 141, Alpha 9. Jess swallowed. "How long have you been down here?" He didn't answer. Instead, he walked to the corner of the room and hit a switch Jess hadn't seen before. The bunker lit up in red emergency lights. Somewhere far below them, another system powered on deeper, louder, and far more alive. Rourke turned to her. "You shouldn't have opened the door," he said quietly. "Because now it knows. We're awake." Jess couldn't tell if her hands were trembling from fear or the cold breath of the pod still clinging to the air. Sergeant Rourke stood rigid, staring at the red lights overhead as if they were more than lights, as if they were signals, triggers, warnings. She wanted to ask what it was what had been activated. What now knew they were awake, but something about the way he carried himself made her stay quiet. This wasn't a man you interrupted when his mind was working. He moved quickly, like he'd never been asleep. He checked the room's perimeter, opened a drawer beside the wall panel, and retrieved what looked like a sidearm, old, but loaded. Then he accessed a console Jess hadn't noticed, one buried beneath a thick dust cloth. With a few quick keystrokes, the screens lit up. Security feeds, multiple levels, bay doors, hallways, stairwells. Every corridor she'd passed through now flickered with grainy black and white footage. Most were empty. But in one, the far end of the level 1 garage, a hatch had opened. Jess hadn't opened it. "Something else is active?" she asked. Rourke didn't look at her. "Not something. Protocol. This facility was never designed to house just machines. It was meant to defend the last critical line of command in the event of full-spectrum collapse, political, environmental, or military." "Collapse of what?" He finally looked at her. "The country. The government. The surface." Jess shook her head. "But that's not what happened. The world moved on. Nobody even knows this place exists anymore." Rourke's jaw tightened. "If I'm awake, then either we failed, or someone decided to finish what we couldn't." A silence passed between them. Then he added, "Or someone like you stumbled in and pulled the wrong lever." Jess bristled. "I didn't pull anything. I opened a door and saved your life." He tilted his head. "And possibly triggered a dormant, AI-based security system with orders to protect this place at all costs." Her stomach sank. They watched the screen. Another hatch opened. A second vehicle powered on one of the claw-wheeled ones. Its sensors glowed faintly as it lifted itself from its magnetic pad and began scanning the bay. "I've seen this before," Rourke muttered. "Level 3 recon units. They're meant to assess breaches and eliminate threats if no commander is detected." "But you're a commander," Jess said. "Not anymore," he replied. "My clearance likely expired the minute I went into stasis. These systems are blind to legacy command structures." He turned to her, suddenly focused. "We need to access the mainframe." "Where?" "Level 5. Deepest part of the complex. Past storage. Past weapons. Past containment." "Containment?" she repeated, her voice catching. He didn't answer. He strapped the sidearm to his belt, walked to the hallway, and held the door open. "You can stay here. Or you can come with me." Jess looked at the pod behind her, the empty space where time had frozen. Then she followed him into the red-lit hallway. By the time they reached the stairwell to level 4, Jess's legs were shaking not from the walk, but from the sheer weight of what she was beginning to understand. This wasn't just an underground garage full of forgotten vehicles. It was an ark. A backup plan for a world that never ended. At least, not in the way its builders expected. And now, two people, one barely scraping by, the other ripped from another decade, were the only ones inside it. Awake. Rourke moved like a man who had memorized the blueprints in another life. His hand gripped the rail tightly, but his movements were fluid. At level 4, they passed racks of weapons sealed behind thick glass ballistic shields, electromagnetic rifles, even prototype armor suits that looked like they belonged in sci-fi movies, not real life. Jess paused. "All of this, it's just been sitting here?" "Waiting," Rourke said. "For what?" "For the world to fall apart." The stairs to level 5 were blocked by a biometric gate. Rourke tried his palm. Denied. Jess stepped forward and held up the access card from her dad's notebook. Rourke blanked. "That's not going to..." "Beep. Access granted." They looked at each other. Jess raised an eyebrow. "He served in the 10th Strategic Mechanized Division. Guess someone forgot to revoke his clearance." Rourke gave the faintest hint of a smile. Remind me to buy your father a drink in the afterlife. They descended into level 5. This time, the air was sterile, too clean. The lighting changed from red to white, and the walls narrowed. The door ahead was labeled, Command, A Interface Secured Access Only. Rourke approached the console beside it and connected a cable from the wall. A deep synthetic voice echoed, Commander identity expired. Reinstatement requested. Jess stepped forward. What happens if we reinstate you? Then I can shut the recon units down. Lock the system. Stop this place from waking up completely. She looked at the console. Do it. He hesitated, then typed in a string of numbers. The system scanned him, paused, then said, Reinstatement complete, interim commander. Rourke, Daniel. He exhaled. It worked, but before he could celebrate, a new voice crackled through the chamber, not synthetic. Human. Miss Carter? A voice asked. This is Agent Hartwell, with the Department of Homeland Protection. We need to speak. Jess's blood ran cold. The voice was coming from a speaker embedded in the ceiling. Don't panic, it continued. We've been monitoring this facility since its reactivation. We'll be arriving at your location in approximately 40 minutes. Rourke cursed. They've been watching. They were always watching. Jess swallowed. What do they want? The voice answered. We want to buy it. The land. The bunker. Everything. $125 million. You walk away. Clean. Silence. Jess stared at Rourke, and then she said, No, because some things are worth more than money. No? The voice repeated, startled, almost amused. Miss Carter, that's a federal offer. $125 million. No taxes, no strings. You could disappear. Start 10 lives. Why say no? Jess stared at the ceiling like she could see the man behind the voice, but her eyes stayed cold. Because this place doesn't belong to you. Rourke didn't speak. He simply walked to the console and shut down the audio relay with a flick of a switch. The silence that followed was deeper than before. He turned to her slowly. You just turned down $125 million. She nodded. Because they don't want this place. They want it buried again. They want it gone. Rourke didn't argue. Instead, he walked to a locker embedded in the back wall of the command center. It hissed as he opened it, revealing a sleek silver briefcase with a military-grade biometric lock. He placed his hand on it. It scanned, then clicked open. Inside, nestled in black foam, was a matte black drive, smaller than a credit card, but thicker than her palm. He handed it to her. What is this? She asked. Everything, he said. The original mission logs, personnel files, prototype specs, emergency orders, and the real reason this facility was built. Jess turned it over. No label, just an embossed seal. Strategic Directive 9, AE. She looked at Rourke. What's on it? A contingency, he said. One that was never supposed to be executed unless the government collapsed from the inside. Her fingers tightened around the drive. Are we talking about war? Rourke shook his head. Worse. Reset. Jess didn't want to ask what that meant. She already felt the answer, pushing against the back of her throat. This facility was part of a ghost fleet, he continued. 12 sites across the country. Vehicles, weapons, command AI, all waiting for activation if the leadership ever became compromised. Their words, not mine. Compromised how? Financially? Morally? Strategically? If the people at the top stopped serving the people at the bottom? Jess stared at the ceiling. That's already happened. Rourke nodded slowly. Then this place was meant to wake up, to make things right. Jess looked at the drive. It felt heavier now. From the corner of the room, the console beeped. Inbound chopper. ETA. 14 minutes. Rourke walked to the gear locker and pulled out a pack. We have a choice. Run? Jess asked. He shook his head. Broadcast. Get this drive online. Let the world see what their government buried. And if we do that, we don't get paid. We don't disappear. But we change everything. Jess took a long breath, and without another word, She walked to the interface port, slid the drive in, and hit upload. The drive clicked into place with a soft electronic chirp. For a second, nothing happened. Then the console flooded with code-scrolling lines of classified operations, tactical logs, encryption keys, and incident reports marked confidential, ease only. Jess stood back as the terminal buzzed to life, opening encrypted archives like locked doors finally swinging wide after decades of silence. She didn't understand all of it, but the images were enough. Photos of other bunkers, diagrams of experimental weaponry, a memo from 1991 describing a potential scenario where the democratic system would be infiltrated by financial actors beyond oversight, a plan to deploy a restoration fleet of AI-guided armored vehicles in cities. All of it. Real. And hidden. Beside her, Rourke adjusted the satellite relay dish and keyed in a broadcast frequency. This will hit every ham band, pirate signal, and satellite within reach. It won't last long before they try to shut it down. But it'll be enough. Jess nodded. Do it. He flipped the final switch. The bunker shuddered not violently, but with purpose. A signal burst through the facility's antenna system, punching through earth and sky, carrying the full contents of Directive 9AE into the open. In the garage above them, the remaining armored vehicles began to hum, as if sensing that the secrets they were built to protect had finally been released. 15 minutes later, the chopper landed. Jess and Rourke stood at the top of the access tunnel, dirt-streaked and silent, as the rotors kicked up dust. Men in suits climbed out, flanked by soldiers with expressions too blank to be casual. The lead agent Hartwell removed his sunglasses slowly and smiled like he still believed this could be negotiated. You had a chance, he said. To disappear, to walk away. Jess crossed her arms. So did you. You could have told the truth before I found it in the ground. Hartwell stepped closer. You think this changes anything? It already has, she said. The world knows. You can't bury that. His jaw twitched. Then Rourke stepped forward. You came for a buyout, but what you found was a sovereign facility under interim command. We're not selling. We're activating. Hartwell laughed. Activating what? You don't have authorization. Jess turned, reached into her jacket, and pulled the laminated badge that had opened every door. My dad gave me this. Said it was just a keepsake. Guess it still means something. Behind her, the lights along the bunker's exterior flickered on not red this time, but white. Clean. Alive. You're trespassing, Jess said. And unless you want the whole world watching you try to silence a mechanic in her own damn shop, I suggest you leave. Hartwell stared at her. Then at the cameras now mounted along the facility's perimeter cameras, already broadcasting. He turned. He left. And just like that, the land she bought for scrap had become something else entirely. A sovereign base. A legacy inherited. A future rewritten.